A darkened room, a gasp of shock, a flash of cold steel. Throughout art history, few works capture the raw intensity of human conflict like Caravaggio's masterwork Judith and Holofernes. Painted around 1599, this canvas didn't just depict a famous biblical story, it revolutionized European art forever. Welcome to episode 31 of Story Behind the Painting by Muzea. Today, we step inside the shadow-drenched tent of an enemy general to explore how one turbulent genius transformed an ancient tale of virtue into a captivating theatrical spectacle.
Welcome to Story Behind the Painting, where we dive into the most famous art roots and learn a lot from that.
At first glance, your eyes are immediately pulled into a shallow, stage-like space dominated by a sudden burst of emotional intensity. Caravaggio does not paint the moments before or after the event, he freezes a single powerful microsecond in time. The background is an absolute pitch-black void, broken only by a heavy crimson curtain draping at the top left to signal a room indoors. Caravaggio uses extreme tenebrism, a dramatic form of shadow, where a single harsh light source beams in from the upper left like a modern theatrical spotlight. This stark light carves the figures out of the dark, bringing every ripple of skin and fabric into razor-sharp focus. Look closely at the center of the canvas. The focal point captures the peak moment of confrontation. Bright crimson accents contrast sharply against the crisp white bedsheets below, underscoring the raw emotion of the scene. The three figures are locked in a tight, overlapping horizontal plane. On the far left lies Holofernes, rendered in diagonal lines of vulnerability. Standing center is Judith, leaning back to maintain her posture with quiet determination. On the far right, leaning intently into the frame, is her companion, creating a tight, unified composition. Today, Judith and Holofernes resides permanently in Rome, Italy, as one of the jewel assets of the Galleria Nazionale d'Arte Antica inside the historic Palazzo Barberini. Rediscovered in a private collection as late as 1950, the monumental canvas sits displayed alongside other world-famous works by Caravaggio, such as his iconic Narcissus. Visitors from around the world can experience its artistic impact up close in the heart of Rome. Caravaggio rejected the Renaissance habit of inventing idealized angelic figures and instead painted directly from life. He hired everyday Romans to act out Holy Scripture inside his studio rather than using imagined archetypes. Judith is posed by Filide Melandroni, a famous 18-year-old Roman model who was Caravaggio's favorite in the late 1590s. She wears an intricate white linen blouse and a dark bodice typical of contemporary 16th century Rome rather than ancient biblical robes. Look closely at her face, where a deeply furrowed brow and a torso leaning back reveal profound internal conflict. She holds her stance at arm's length to create distance, driven by divine duty yet visibly affected by the gravity of her actions. Holofernes appears stripped of armor and power, his body contorted across the bedsheets in the climax of the scene. Every muscle is strained in a futile reflex to react, conveying the anatomy of defeat. His mouth is open in an intense, silent expression of shock and awe, eyes rolling upward in dramatic climax. Caravaggio likely based these details on observing intense public events in Rome around 1599. Abra is painted directly beside Judith instead of waiting outside as in the traditional text, becoming a cold accomplice. Caravaggio renders Abra as a deeply wrinkled elderly woman to create a stark visual contrast with Judith's luminous skin. Abra's eyes are wide and unblinking as she leans forward, gripping a heavy cloth sack to receive the object the moment the act is complete. To fully grasp the thematic depth of this canvas, we look back to the traditional Book of Judith, a historic narrative centered on courage and leadership. The story unfolds during an ancient period of regional tension. The leader Holofernes oversees a major expedition near the town of Bethulia. Facing uncertain outcomes, the town's leaders consider their remaining options. Enter Judith, a respected, influential figure in her community. Choosing to take initiative, she devises a diplomatic strategy. Dressed in fine attire, she travels beyond the city gates accompanied by her companion Abra to the main camp to request a meeting with Holofernes. Impressed by Judith's intellect and eloquence, Holofernes hosts an evening banquet inside his private pavilion. As the gathering concludes late into the night, the venue grows quiet, leaving Holofernes resting. This is where Caravaggio joins the narrative. Judith stands at the center of the scene, reflecting silently before taking decisive action to secure her community's future. Earlier Renaissance artists almost always chose to depict Judith following these events, standing calmly in the sunlight or returning to her hometown. They portrayed her as a static symbol of virtue and classical poise. Caravaggio shattered this tradition entirely. He brings viewers directly into the immediate presence of the scene. By focusing on emotional intensity and dynamic composition, Caravaggio transforms a traditional tale into a profound study of human resolve. Behind almost every masterpiece of the Italian Baroque stands a powerful patron with a specific vision. In the case of Judith and Holofernes, that man was Ottavio Costa, one of the wealthiest Genoese bankers living in Rome. Ottavio Costa was not just a financier to the Papal See, he was an avid, highly sophisticated art collector. He recognized Caravaggio's groundbreaking genius early on and became one of the artist's crucial early supporters in Rome. Costa did not want a conventional altarpiece to hang in a public chapel. He wanted an exclusive, deeply compelling masterpiece for his personal residence. To understand why this subject was so relevant in 1599, we look to the Catholic Counter-Reformation. During this era of cultural renewal, religious art was used to convey powerful theological messages. The story of Judith, a devout heroine overcoming a formidable opponent, served as a potent metaphor for steadfast faith. The Church encouraged art that was dramatic, expressive, and deeply memorable to spark emotion in viewers. Costa prized Caravaggio's creation so highly that he kept the canvas guarded behind a dark silk veil in his private collection. It was shown only to select guests, turning the viewing experience into an exclusive, reveal-driven event. When he wrote his will, he placed a strict legal condition on it. The canvas was never to be sold, gifted, or separated from the Costa family estate under any circumstances. Ironically, Costa's protective secrecy worked too well, and over generations, memory of the painting's exact location faded. It eventually slipped into private obscurity and remained unknown to art historians for over 3 centuries. The painting was miraculously rediscovered in Rome in 1950. To understand how Judith and Holofernes came to exist, we look into the dynamic, extraordinary life of the painter himself. Michelangelo Merisi, known to the world simply as Caravaggio, 1571–1610. Born in northern Italy, Caravaggio faced early loss before completing an apprenticeship in Milan. He arrived in Rome around 1592 as an unknown 21-year-old. For his first few years in the Eternal City, he lived in poverty, painting detailed still lifes of fruit and everyday street figures to establish his reputation. His trajectory changed when his talent caught the eye of Cardinal Francesco Maria del Monte, a wealthy, influential diplomat. Del Monte invited Caravaggio into his residence, providing him with financial support, studio resources, and access to Rome's elite social circles. Through Del Monte's connections, Caravaggio secured his first major public commission in 1599, the monumental canvases for the Contarelli Chapel. When his calling of St. Matthew was unveiled, it transformed the Roman art scene. Overnight, Caravaggio became the most celebrated and discussed artist in Rome. His technique of using ordinary citizens to depict classic narratives thrilled young creators and reshaped art history. Caravaggio didn't just study emotional intensity, he experienced it. A bit like Christopher Nolan or maybe Mel Gibson, even more. He was a complex, intensely passionate individual who navigated the tumultuous streets of Rome, frequently finding himself at the center of public controversy. In September 1599, around the time he was working on Judith, Caravaggio attended significant public events in Rome that drew vast crowds. The intense emotion and raw human drama of these public gatherings profoundly affected him. He translated that exact psychological realism directly onto the canvas, giving his subjects a level of emotional accuracy never before seen in Western art. Caravaggio's life was cut short at just 38, but in his brief, extraordinary career he transformed Renaissance tradition and reshaped Western art. His legacy rests on three major contributions. First, he mastered Tenebrism and dramatic light. Instead of soft, balanced lighting of the High Renaissance, he placed backgrounds into deep darkness and focused a single, strong light source on his subjects. This created theatrical realism and emotional depth that placed the viewer at the center of the story. A split-screen comparison shows Caravaggio's Judith and Holofernes beside Artemisia Gentileschi's version, highlighting bold brushwork and contrast. Second, he practiced radical naturalism and rejected idealization. Before him, classical figures had smooth skin and idealized proportions, but he painted directly from living street models. He included weathered faces, worn hands, bare feet, and expressive features, making classic narratives accessible and profoundly human. Third, though he had no formal workshop, his technique sparked an international movement known as the Caravaggisti. Artists from across Europe traveled to Rome to study his dramatic style, spreading it internationally. Most famous among the Caravaggisti was Artemisia Gentileschi, who took his intense realism and developed powerful interpretations of biblical heroines. Caravaggio's mastery of light and human emotion laid the groundwork for the Baroque era and influenced masters like Rembrandt, Velázquez, and Rubens. Judith and Holofernes is far more than a masterpiece of 17th century art history. It is a psychological mirror, a compelling exploration of determination colliding with human vulnerability. Where other artists saw a static myth, Caravaggio captured an authentic human moment. He stripped away the distant grandeur of classical traditions, replacing it with an intense, immediate focus on real-life emotion. In doing so, he created a composition where moral resolve and deep psychological tension coexist on a single canvas. Centuries after its creation, the painting hasn't lost any of its power to captivate and intrigue viewers. Caravaggio proved that true art doesn't just ask us to admire classical beauty, it invites us to look deeply into the full range of human experience. Want to inspect every brushstroke, discover hidden details, and explore thousands of world-famous masterpieces in ultra-high resolution right from your phone? Download the Muzea app today on iOS and Android, unlock expert audio guides, interactive VR gallery tours, and the stories behind the world's greatest art. Tap the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to install Muzea now.
Welcome to Story Behind the Painting, where we dive into the most famous art routes and learn a lot from that.